Let's strip this down to facts. Before the lawsuits, before the headlines, before the toxic set narrative took over the internet. In January 2023, 4 months before filming It Ends With Us even began, Blake Lively and Justin Baldoni were texting like close collaborators who genuinely liked each other. That's not interpretation, that's straight from the documented message timeline. The tone wasn't icy, it wasn't strained, it was warm. They joked about birthdays, they talked about their kids meeting in New York. Blake asked for Justin's wife Emily's number. There were heart emojis, there were playful comments about last names and Ryan Reynolds. At one point, Justin even teased that he needed Ryan's number so he could harass him once a day about being a fan. This wasn't strictly business. But here's where it gets more interesting. Professionally, Justin kept Blake involved in everything. Crew hires, casting ideas, script notes. He updated her before decisions were finalized. He invited her feedback directly. That matters. When he mentioned bringing in a production designer whose work he admired, he told her first. When he was doing script revisions, he explicitly welcomed her thoughts. That's not a director trying to isolate his lead actress. That's someone treating her like a creative partner. And Blake did give notes. One detailed suggestion focused on the introduction of Alyssa's character. The concern was that a certain line might make her seem unrealistic or overly privileged. There was also feedback about the flower shop scenes, adding more visible effort in the renovation process, so Lily's dream didn't feel too easy. Interestingly, the finished film includes those renovation elements, which suggests those notes weren't ignored. So by late January, we have a clear picture: friendly texts, open collaboration, shared enthusiasm about the project. Then comes a message that changes the way you look at everything that happened later. On January 26, 2023, long before filming, long before any alleged fallout, Justin texts Blake suggesting that if they ever make a sequel, she should direct it. That wasn't a red carpet compliment. That wasn't damage control. That was months before the public even knew there might be tension. He says he means it. She responds warmly, thanking him and expressing appreciation for their partnership. Think about that timeline carefully. If, as later claimed, there were already serious concerns about his behavior or professionalism, why would that level of trust and creative encouragement exist privately? Why would he be offering her the director's chair for a future installment? Now let's move to April 2023. On April 11th, Justin updates Blake about casting decisions, including discussions about who might play her character's mother. She asks when decisions will be made. He suggests they talk the next day. She agrees. On April 12th, they meet in person. According to their texts, it turns into a relaxed, almost family-like visit. He thanks her for letting him hold her baby. She asks him to send photos from the visit. She jokes that they got socially inspired and didn't get enough work done. He responds that they're so much fun. He mentions how sweet the baby smelled. Pause there, because according to later claims, by this point she allegedly felt uncomfortable around him. Yet the documented exchange that same day reads like two friends who enjoyed each other's company. There's no coldness, no distance, no visible tension. And then, just hours after that in-person meeting, the tone shifts dramatically. Not in texts between Blake and Justin, in texts between Blake and Taylor Swift. Blake asks Taylor for a favor. When she arrives at the apartment while Justin is still there, she should praise a specific rooftop scene and reinforce how strong it is creatively. In that same exchange, she refers to Justin as a clown and a doofus, criticizing his rewrite and implying he thinks he's suddenly a writer. This is happening the day after he thanked her for letting him hold her baby. That contrast is where the timeline becomes explosive. Public warmth, private ridicule. Friendly collaboration in one thread, strategic positioning in another. And if you follow this closely, it raises a bigger question.
Was the conflict sudden, or was it strategic? Because when you map out the messages chronologically, you don't see a slow breakdown, you see two completely different narratives unfolding at the same time.
Once you continue through the April timeline, the contrast becomes even harder to ignore. On April 11th, Justin updates Blake about casting options. He asks for her thoughts before finalizing anything. She thanks him for the context and asks when decisions will be made. He says within a few days and suggests they talk tomorrow. She responds, "Perfect, I'll watch it. We'll catch up tomorrow." The next morning, he follows up about casting for the role of Lily's mother. One actress passed, he proposes another name and explicitly says he wanted Blake's thoughts first. She reacts positively and thanks him for asking. That same afternoon, after their in-person meeting, he texts, "Thank you for letting me hold your baby. Made my day." She responds warmly and asks him to send the photos. She also tells him to feel free to connect her directly with producer Alex. Then she jokes that they hung out so much they didn't get enough work done and calls it a hurricane but fun. He replies that they're so much fun and comments on how sweet the baby smelled. That's the documented exchange. Now, line that up with what happens just hours later in her separate messages. In her texts to Taylor Swift that same day, Blake asks Taylor to reinforce praise for the rooftop scene in front of Justin. She says he thinks he's a writer now. She calls him a clown. There's no visible tension in her thread with Justin. No argument, no disagreement, no fallout. But privately, in another thread, she's framing him very differently. The next layer of the Taylor exchange is even more telling. After Taylor leaves, Blake texts that the clown is falling for it, but also resisting. She continues criticizing him and references him claiming he doesn't know much about pop culture. She presents that as somehow offensive or revealing. The most striking part is tone. In the Blake-Justin thread, everything is collaborative. In the Blake-Taylor thread, it's dismissive and strategic. And here's what complicates things further. Blake also frames Justin as someone who monetizes discussions about toxic masculinity and presents himself publicly in a certain light. Yet at this same moment, he's inviting her creative notes, suggesting she direct a sequel and including her in major production decisions. Those two realities don't easily coexist. If someone feels professionally undermined or personally threatened, the communication typically reflects that shift. There are colder responses, shorter replies, distance. None of that appears in her direct exchanges with him during this period. Instead, what you see is dual messaging. One version of Justin in the professional thread, supportive, inclusive, collaborative. Another version in the private commentary, insecure, performative, someone to outmaneuver. And that's where motive becomes the central question. Because this wasn't a heat-of-the-moment argument. This was positioning. She specifically asks Taylor to validate a scene in front of him, not privately, publicly, in person. She even offers to send Taylor the pages, but says she doesn't have to read them. The goal wasn't analysis, it was reinforcement. When you step back, it reads less like venting and more like influence management, which brings us to a bigger pattern, one that extends beyond this film. Because at the same time all of this is unfolding, another conversation in pop culture is heating up, a different kind of narrative control, a different kind of accountability debate, and it centers on a show that built its empire on shaping perception, America's Next Top Model. That controversy may seem unrelated at first, but it isn't. It's about power, about who controls the edit, about how reality gets reframed and who pays the price when it does. While the Blake-Justin timeline raises questions about private narratives versus public behavior, another controversy dominating headlines follows a similar theme: accountability in entertainment. The renewed scrutiny around America's Next Top Model has forced a cultural reassessment of what was once considered normal reality television. The series, created and hosted by Tyra Banks, launched in 2003 and became a defining show of its era. For years, audiences watched young, aspiring models compete in high-pressure environments where their appearances, bodies, and personalities were judged weekly. But watching it today through a modern lens feels different.
Former contestants have described extreme emotional stress, manipulation, and humiliation. Some recount drastic physical makeovers, including teeth being removed to close a gap. Others describe being pushed into emotionally volatile situations to create drama. One of the most disturbing accounts involves a contestant who became heavily intoxicated during an overseas trip and later said she felt taken advantage of while cameras continued filming. The aftermath of that incident was broadcast, including her emotional breakdown the next day. At the time, it was framed as raw reality. Today, it reads as exploitation. What makes this especially complicated is that Tyra Banks was not just the host, she was the creator and executive producer. Yet in recent reflections, she has suggested that many decisions were out of her hands and that it was a different era of television. That explanation hasn't satisfied everyone. Critics argue that being the face and creative force of a show comes with responsibility. Supporters counter that reality television is a machine driven by editors, producers, network pressures, and audience demand for drama. The truth likely lives somewhere in between. And that's where the parallel to the Blake-Justin situation becomes interesting. Both situations revolve around perception management. On America's Next Top Model, editing shaped contestants into heroes or villains. Conflicts were amplified. Vulnerabilities were exposed. Viewers reacted to curated narratives without seeing the full production context. In the Blake-Justin timeline, the public narrative that later emerged doesn't cleanly align with the documented text exchanges from early 2023. In both cases, what audiences initially believed was based on incomplete information. There's also a deeper question beneath all of this. Why does entertainment so often reward conflict? Why do we gravitate toward narratives of betrayal, downfall, and scandal? Reality television has long thrived on heightened emotion. Contestants are isolated, pressured, sleep-deprived, and constantly filmed. Producers guide story arcs. Editors determine what viewers see. When those participants leave the show, they live with the public's interpretation of a version of themselves shaped in a cutting room. Some former models from America's Next Top Model have said they struggled for years with the way they were portrayed. Others claim winning the show didn't even translate into sustainable careers because the fashion industry was reluctant to hire reality TV contestants. The promise was transformation. The result was often something else. And that brings us back to the larger cultural shift happening now. Audiences are re-evaluating past media. They're questioning authority figures. They're scrutinizing power dynamics more closely than ever. Whether it's a film set, a reality show, or a celebrity friendship, the same demand echoes. Show the full picture. The Blake-Justin messages show one version of events in early 2023: collaboration, warmth, inclusion. The private commentary tells another story unfolding at the same time. The ANTM backlash reflects how easily narratives can be constructed and later dismantled. In all of it, the common thread isn't just drama, it's control. Who shapes the story, who influences perception, and what happens when the receipts finally surface. Because in the age of screenshots and archived messages, timelines don't just tell stories, they expose them.